So hi everyone. What we're going to be doing today is Job's wife. And let me share the screen with you. And there are lots and lots and lots of pictures, and we'll probably look at them at the end because they're really, there's someone with some background noise there. I'm not sure where it's coming from.
Yeah.
It might be Joyce, maybe. 1 second. It's not Joyce? Maybe it's Lita. Okay, anyway, I just muted the two of you if there was some background noise coming from someplace. Okay, so this is, I don't know if you know the Job story or not, but anyway, I'll introduce you to the Job story, and then we'll look at some things having to do with his wife. But here you can see just with the raised finger of Job's wife to this man who's suffering with sores all over, right, all over his body. And notice her finger upraised, like, and this is the traditional understanding of Job's wife, that she's not a very sympathetic person. So the story, the Job story begins, and we're not going to read all of it. We're only going to look at chapter 1 and also at the last chapter, because these are the readable parts, right? I taught Job in my Hebrew speaking group, and at the end they begged me, let's finish this already. It took us 2 years to go through it, and it was very, very difficult reading. And it was during, I don't know if it was during the Corona period, and so in the end, that's when we decided to go back to the book of Genesis, because they were so tired of the book of Job. But this part is the part that all of you probably know, that Job was a man who was blameless and upright, and he feared God, and he shunned evil. All right, so in other words, he was like perfect, right? And he had 7 sons, and he had 3 daughters, lots of flock, sheep, camels, you name it, okay? Slaves. He was greater than all the Easterners. And so he had, he had an amazing amount of property, and his sons would hold an annual feast, and they would drink and whatever. And then one day, when the year of the feast came around, this would happen on a regular basis. And so, and he was always praying and always being very super careful to pray to God. And then one day, the sons of God came to stand in attendance before the Lord. And the adversary, now the adversary, who is called in Hebrew Satan, or Satan, right? But rather than say Satan, we'll call him the adversary, because it's not the Satan that you think of, it's a person who's always causing trouble, but he's God's adversary, which I guess is what Satan is to a certain degree. And the Lord said to him, where do you come from? And he says, I've come from roaming the earth and walking around. And God brags to Satan and says, have you paid heed to my servant Job? For there's none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. So in other words, God is basically bragging. And to a certain degree, he's giving a ayin hara, a kanina hara, right? An ayin hara to, because this immediately sets up Job, the adversary sets him up, and he says, well, of course he doesn't, he loves you because you've given him so much, right? You've blessed him, right? But if you take everything away from him, he'll curse you, all right? And God says, okay, right? Whatever you have is, you can do to him whatever you want. Only against him, do not reach out your hand. In other words, you have to leave him alive. So what does Satan do? And one day, everyone ends up being killed. His sons, his daughters, the cattle, everyone. And one person, a man, is left to escape, to tell Job what happened, all right? And as he's saying it, more people come out, and more people come out, till in the end, nothing is left. And Job, at the very end of this story, rose and tore his garment and shaved his head and fell to the earth and bowed down. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord has given, and the Lord has taken. May the Lord's name be blessed. With all this, Job did not offend, nor did he blame God. Okay, so in other words, he remains perfect in terms of his belief in God. And by the way, these words at the end are the words that you say when?
At a funeral.
What?
At a funeral.
At a funeral. Okay. In other words, these are the words, and they, in case you did not realize, they come from Job. Okay, so you're learning something new if you did not know that they came from Job. Okay, so you have a situation where, and here you have someone, here you have the messenger who is coming, right? This is William Blake, and William Blake has a whole bunch of pictures we'll look at the end about Job. And so here you have the messenger coming to, right? And I alone escaped to tell you, all right? In other words, and while he's speaking, another one comes and another one and more disaster till they're left with nothing. And so here you could see that Job is sitting with his wife. Okay, so she is in the picture here, all right? And here's another picture. It's the same picture, but it's a little bit more dramatic because it's in color, but also from William Blake, okay? And then the story continues in chapter 2, and this is where Job's wife shows up, right? So one day, right, the sons of God came to stand in attendance before God, right? And again, the adversary came. And again, God says to him, see, where have you come from? And then now again, he continues to brag. God continues to brag. Have you paid heed to my servant Job? There's none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil and still clings to his innocence. And you incited me against him to destroy him for nothing. And the adversary answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life, yet reach out, pray your hand and strike his bone and his flesh. Will he not curse you to your face? And the Lord said to the adversary, here he is in your hands. Only preserve his life. So I made a mistake earlier. He was not to touch him. In other words, he could take everything away from him, but not to touch him physically. But now here he says, okay, you can touch him physically, but don't kill him, okay? And so Satan goes out. He struck Job with a grievous burning rash from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head, right? And Job took a potsherd to scrape himself with, and he was sitting among the ashes. In other words, so this is a situation. He has been struck with a grievous burning rash, and he's sitting among the ashes. And what happens? And his wife said to him, but this is not the adversary, his wife said to him, do you still cling to your innocence? Curse God and die. And he said to her, you speak to me as one of the base women. The Hebrew word in Hebrew is nevelot, which is a terrible thing to say. The base woman would speak. You speak to me as one of the nevelot would speak. Shall we accept good from God too, and evil we shall not accept? With all this, Job did not offend with his lips. It's very interesting. We don't know what he thought, but he did not offend with his lips. So this is the only thing we see about his wife, all right? His wife says to him, curse God and die. And then Job's 3 companions heard of this, and they came, each of them from their place, and they agreed to meet to grieve with him and to comfort him. And they lifted their eyes from afar, and they did not recognize him because he looked so awful, all right? And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. It's sort of a little bit like Shiva, all right? And none spoke a word to him, for they saw that the pain was very great. And then the rest of the book will be how his friends do speak to him and have stuff to say to him. And there's a lot of stuff about theology. We're not going to go there. However, what I do want you to pay attention to is the wife, all right? This is the only thing we know about the wife. So here's a picture of, it's from an anonymous artist. from 1532 in something called Feldbuch der Hundartsnee, all right? It's a German book. It's called Jung on the Dung Heap. And here he's on the dung heap with, you could see all sorts of skin diseases all over him, right? And here is his wife saying in Latin, or maybe in German, I'm not sure, bene, bless, or curse God, Deo, curse God, and die, morir. It must be Latin because it looks like Latin, not German. Okay. So, but on the top it is German. On the top you can even see the German letters. Okay, so this is, and on top is a picture of Satan, right? Sort of Satan. But notice that around here, what do you have? You also have some sort of a
halo.
A halo, right? So of course it's very Christian, but very, very interesting. Okay, so the question is, of course, is what was it like for Job's wife, right? And she's really, she gets a very terrible rap, right? And today we understand euthanasia if you're suffering so much. She sees him suffering, and but besides that, every one of Job's trials, every one of them was also borne by her, right? But no one thinks about being compassionate towards her, right? Right? She had riches too, right? He's suffering from a horrible disease. He's depressed, right? And he's not blaming God. And she is sitting with him, and maybe she has empathy for him, right? Curse him and die, and you'll stop suffering, all right? We don't know, right? We don't know what her motivations are for telling him curse God and die, all right? But we do know that she experienced the death of every single one of her children. She experienced dramatic financial loss. She became the caretaker for her disease-ravaged husband when everyone else had deserted Job. Her life was constant. Okay, so this is from a Christian blog spot called Scripture Handmaidens. Okay. In the Midrash, she's criticized. She's criticized for advising her husband to commit blasphemy, right? Because if you commit suicide, you're not supposed to be doing that, all right? So, and the rabbis even often draw a connection between Job's wife and Eve, right? That because Job learned from Adam's mistake. What was Adam's mistake?
Eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge.
He listened to his wife, right? Job learned from Adam's mistake not to listen to his wife, right? They make that connection, all right? Some of them identify Job as wife as being Dinah's daughter. We don't know what time period this is. We have no idea what the time period is. So that solves the problem of Dinah, right? Because everyone's always looking for solutions for Dinah in the Midrash.
Yeah, and by making Dinah his wife, it also makes him Jewish, or connects him to the father, the patriarchs. Whereas right now he lives in this mythical place, and there's no hint at all that he's actually Jewish.
Right. But there's also an amazing Midrash which connects him to Abraham, all right? There's an amazing, because there's a Midrash which has the same exact story of Job's, what happens to Job, making Abraham the Job figure, and the Midrash has Satan coming there, and how also God bragging how much Abraham loves him and whatever, and how faithful he is, and then Satan says to God, well, why don't you have him sacrifice his son, and let's see how loyal he is to you. So in other words, there's a very similar Midrash. It's a very well-known Midrash, which is based on Abraham. So, okay, so here in another Midrash, Job was a non-Jew, all right? But Dinah converted him, Okay, so it's very interesting what you said. So okay, now we have here in a poem. It's hard to read in a book, a collection that I have from. I have no idea where I picked it up. I think in a used bookstore or something. It was called Ladies of Genesis, and it's by Barbara Hollander. I once Googled her. I couldn't find anything about her, but here's a copy of her book, and I took a picture of the. She had something called Job's Wife. Sue, did you read this?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Day after day, he asks the same question. He holds it in his mouth like a salt stone he can't spit out, and rasps and scrapes his boils. A practical man, he wants a practical answer, a palpable truth. Funny he never asked why the children died. He was so strong, a wall I hurled my grief against. I don't care what they say. You never get over losing a child. But we shared it. Now his life's complete with his body and his question. His friends know all the reasons he had it coming. They're fortified with answers so they don't catch anything mysterious from him. It's not your fault, I tell him. You're a good man. It's not his fault. Sometimes I get so tired. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to watch it anymore. That's when I scream at him, curse God, Job, curse God.
Okay. This is really amazing. It's really, really amazing. And in the introduction to the Barbara Collins writes here, or maybe it's, I don't really know, and I guess not, because it says that she's another unnamed woman. I guess it's in the introduction to her book, or maybe to this poem. I guess it appears someplace else.
Job's wife.
What?
Job's wife is the unnamed woman.
Yeah, no, I know, but
No?
I think I found this commentary in some book, and I don't have the source here, so I apologize. So it says here, Job's wife is another unnamed woman. Of her, we learn only that she could not bear to watch his suffering and urged him to blaspheme God so that he would not be struck dead. The patience of Job is legendary and fictitious. He complained bitterly of his trials, insisted on his innocence, demanded to be told the reason for his suffering. His wife's suffering may be imagined. Although in the introduction, Hollander attests that she cannot acknowledge Job's suffering, this being the reason why she wishes he would be struck dead, the poem itself suggests that she's at the end of her tether, in contrast to the biblical text, which focuses exclusively on Job. Hollander expresses his wife's emotions, giving her a voice to express her own pain. Okay, so I just want to go back just for 2 seconds. All of this that we're going to be seeing is based just on these 2 verses in chapter 2, 9 and 10. Okay, just to remember that. All of this, what we're going to see. I have quite a few poems here, but I eliminated most of them. But there's one more by Shirley Kaufman here, which I think might be interesting also to read. And Toby, would you like to read Job's wife?
Yes. She has to pity him after what happened, rocking alone like that in the rubble, covered with boils. She watched him scrape his sores with anything broken, half naked and bleeding, scraping his soul. And if she staggers out of the dark to hound him when he is busy with his own grief, surely he'll speak for her too. 3 daughters, 7 sons, aren't they in this together? She's wearing the slip she had on when the house was blitzed, and everything with it. Children, donkeys, we know how many. And how, with nothing to lose, she begs him to damn God and die. He's all that's left, beyond what they used to be for each other, abuse or solace. He scratches his scabs and tells her she's foolish. She stares at the unrelenting sky.
Okay, now this is really very interesting because in a book by Miriam Glazer, right, there were 2 versions, and in the original version, right, the final line was at the rancid sky, right? And in this version, it was replaced with at the unrelenting sky. What's the difference between the rancid sky and the unrelenting sky?
Unrelenting is an ongoing, never ending.
Okay. In other
Where-
words, it brings us to sort of like us, right? Right? It makes it more universal. If it's rancid, what does the word rancid actually mean?
It's like rotten.
Yeah.
Right. Rotten, smelly, right? It's like you have food that's rancid, you know, you throw it out,
Boiled.
right? When you clean your refrigerator, you know, right? So, so it says here in the 1996 version of the poem, Kaufman describes, right, heaven and God as rancid, hinting at Job's wife's anger and resentment towards God and her husband. The rancid sky may be a metaphor for the sky as mirroring Job's scabs, which probably are rancid. They probably smell, right? The cause and the effect, thus reflecting each other. And so her anger is directed at both the sky, which is smelly, and the sores. In the new version, it becomes unrelenting, adding a measure of desperation to the mix in the face of God's hiding of his presence and the shutting up of heaven, right? In the later text, all her hope appears to have vanished. Okay? This is, by the way, there's an up and coming Chokeret researcher at Bar-Ilan University. Her name is Anat Kaplowitz-Breyer, and she is very interested in Midrashic poems. And this appeared in an article called Commemorating the Nameless Wives of the Bible. I'll make her name bigger so you can see it. And I've been in communication with her over the years. We've been, you know, I haven't met her personally, but I've met her on Zoom at conferences. Okay, so now we come to Vanessa Ox, and Vanessa Ox has a book which is called Sarah Laughed, right? And it's called Modern Lessons from the Wisdom and Stories of Biblical Women. I have this in my possession because I wrote a review of her book many years ago. I've been in touch with her lately. I don't know why. Did I have her come to speak to us years ago here? Does anyone remember when I first taught this? I don't know. Anyway, recently I've been in touch with her, and this is her story. We need 4 readers for this story. So, Barsha, you're reader 1, Geraldine reader 2,
Okay.
Norman reader 3, and Barbara reader 4. Okay.
You ready?
I'm ready. Yeah. I'll make it
Okay.
bigger.
Can you? Oh, that's much better. Thank you. I made you some ointment, Job, said his wife. She had pounded camphor and wintergreen leaves together into a paste and offered it to him as he lay limp under a skeleton of a tree in the hot sun. Had morning come, she and Job hardly noticed the movements of light and dark, days and nights into weeks. Grief had pushed them outside, the coherent way one keeps track of one's time on earth. They were just there, still alive but numb, bodies marking places for souls that were once there. Once strangers to grief, she and Job now inhabited the arid and narrow land of endless sorrow. Only in the strictest sense had they survived the horrific deaths of all their children. No ointment, Job said, pushing her away by turning his neck stiffly in the other direction, wrapping himself more rigidly in remnants of a robe the color of dust. The hurt is beyond hurting. I drown in loss. At one time, she could comfort him with a glance, a touch. Now nothing. How tiny were the scratches and disappointments they once considered calamities. A finger scalded in cooking, a daughter who took a spill, a son who shrieked with night fears, a wilting barley crop, a sheep or two failing to flourish, a donkey with a sprain. Such were the bumps that had interrupted their constant flow of happiness.
They had believed that those who lived lives of impeccable righteousness, who worked hard at inspecting themselves for imperfections, and who remembered to atone with sincerity, would find favor in God's eyes. Until now, their lives of scrupulous piety and bounteous blessing confirmed their assumption. Job drew no insight from the fiery heat burned in now. In an instant, a wind had come and taken all they had and loved. On a single morning, they buried each one of their children, absence piling on absence, their home gone, their animals, their crops, their health. But after the death of their children, the other losses only gave shade to pitch black. It would stop the itching, Job's wife said, scooping some of the cool salve into her fingers, remembering how she would do this for the children when the sun had burned them. I would feel I had at least done something. That's all there's left, Job. That some feeling could stir between us with no more caring. Anyway, how will we know who we are alive?
Everyone needs to mute if you're not talking. There's a
Yeah,
lot
that
of
was kind of
background noise.
distracting.
He pushed her fingers away with the back of his palm. This is the difference between you and me. You can still feel. He struggled to rise to his feet, imagining he had the strength to lift himself and say his morning benedictions. He wilted back to the ground. I'll tell you what the difference is between us, his wife said. You've become a cold stone who continues to pray to the one who spoke and brought the world into being, saying, "Thank you, thank you." You're a fool, Job. Can a man pray when he cannot even feel? Your faithfulness is mocked. God shouldn't be hearing your thanks. For what? This is our way. There are no other words but the ancient ones, said Job. No, Job, there is no more way. Not as we knew it, said his wife. The old words lost their power when our lives fell apart. You should hear yourself. Your old words, Job, are dead rocks. They don't rise up. We have nothing left to sacrifice, Job, nothing to give to the poor.
There is still repentance, Job offered. Repentance for what? For leading good lives? For raising fine children? For caring for others? For pious worship? Listen to me, Job. I will not curse God, he said. Curse with God, Job, as I have done. Curse along with God. Could God not also curse the fate that has befallen us? Job unleashed his anger. He lashed out at God, at life. His wife waited at a distance as he raged. If God could hear those new words and respond, Job might return to her and to the land of the living.
This is actually, what are your thoughts about this? This is really, a lot of her stuff is not as strong as this one, but this is really very, very strong. But what are your thoughts about this?
Wow.
Besides, wow.
I had a sudden thought that this reminds me just a little bit of the giving tree.
Oh,
You remember what we said
Right.
in the end, that
We
perhaps
didn't, yeah,
the giving tree is a little bit too giving, and he's really
right.
not very smart.
okay.
I find
Right.
that the
That's a good-
descriptions are
Wait,
so
Bonnie,
strong.
Bonnie, again.
I said I find that the descriptions and the metaphors are so vivid. Everything is very vivid here, and as we or as we've lived our lives in the last couple of years, there's a lot of things here that I can relate to.
Right.
There's so much pain, and and why do people have to suffer such pain, even if they're good people? And there's not, and maybe like what Norman just said, the giving tree, and there are no answers, but it's so spot on, and all of it's amazing. It's very strong. I guess
Right.
that's what I'm trying to say. It's very strong.
Right. I think she's done a very good job. I mean, in contrast, not that I have anything bad to say about the poems, but here she develops it, and it's very, very visceral. The whole thing is very visceral. Yeah, Stevie.
I really wonder
Oh.
how when she says, I will not curse God, he said, I wonder how could anyone believe in any God after this? What kind of a belief system can you have when you go through this?
Well, it's like people who went through the Holocaust. There are those who
Yeah,
it
come
caused to
out.
totally give
Yeah,
up their faith, and there are those that
that's
it made
right.
more faithful
They
because
both
faith was all they
exactly.
had left. They'd lost
Exactly.
everything.
Right. And
Exactly.
we're going to come to something which will remind us of the Holocaust at the end. But I just want to, first of all, I think Stevie wanted to say something, but just also pay attention. It's curse with God, curse along with God, all right? In other words, not curse God, but curse with God, curse along with God. In other words, making God sort of into a partner, right? That God is certainly responsible for all of this, but also that maybe God wants to have his people stand up against him, right? In other words, Abraham failed the test because he didn't stand up to God. I mean, I'm not talking about with Sodom and Gomorrah, but when it came to sacrificing his own son, right? He failed the test. He actually went through with it, right? Till the very, very end. Stevie, you wanted to say something, and then we'll continue.
Yeah, I found it very curious that she seems to have okay, in Christianity they would have said God had done this to Job. But she seems to be saying that she knows that some other entity other than God had done this to them, so that God would curse along, that Job could curse along with God, that God was just as upset that all of this had happened to them. So how did she know that it was somebody else? I mean, that it was some other entity?
We don't know. This is an interpretation, but I think it's very interesting that God now, the whole idea of the partnership, right? That we're partners. There's the whole model that we're partners with God. Tikkun Olam, right? All of that stuff. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. That doesn't sound nice. But you know what right? In other words, the whole idea that we're partners with God, and together we work together, and our world is imperfect, and we work together with God to make it a better place. And and we don't blame God for bad things happening. It's people who cause bad things to happen. Of course.
Yeah. Actually, right? if we read this together with the beginning of the story in the Tanakh, God probably feels guilty because he told Satan, the adversary, go do what you want. And now he's saying, uh-oh, I opened the Pandora's box, and that's why God needs to be cursing too. He really was responsible.
Exactly.
This brings up the idea of God not being all powerful, all knowing, etc. If God is, God would have known what Satan was about to do. God would have solved the issue. And that's not a very Christian thing, or a very standard thing to believe in, that God isn't all knowing, all powerful, all comprehensive.
It's a terrible story. I mean, first of all, God is bragging. He's giving the forces of evil full power. He's relinquishing his power and to allow him to torture people. I mean, that's really awful. But on the other hand, by the way, in Isaiah, I always forget what chapter it is. But in Isaiah, it says God created evil along with,
Good.
good. All right. So, I mean, so, okay, let's go on because there's more stuff today, a lot of stuff today. So these are Job's comforters. We're not going to go into that part, but that's a basic part of the whole book. And this is William Blake again. This is his comforters. And here we have the so-called comforters who were there for 7 days and had nothing to say. And now, for the rest of the book, they have plenty to say. And here is Job's wife. Look at Job's wife here.
Yeah.
Look at her hands. Look at her hands. And look at Job's hands. Look at his hands.
His hands are very small and feminine.
And look at their hands. Look at the pointing hands. The hands are amazing here, right? The hands are absolutely amazing. I mean, William Blake has really, he's gone full blasted into this. Okay, so just again to remind us, so in the biblical text, she's not given a name, an origin, she's obscure, right? We forget about what we know from the Midrash. She's only his wife. She basically does not exist except for the, and even in the second chapter, she's not meant, she doesn't get lineage. She just is, fully presented, all right? And so all of a sudden, where does she come from, right? And though, there's no one is interested in her, right? They don't care about her. She's a mother, right? All these nice things we saw about her now, her maternal duties and everything, that's all Midrash. In the Bible, it's not there at all. And even when the Midrash identifies her with Dinah, it doesn't elaborate on that, right? And so in the end, basically, she has been condemned by interpreters through the ages, as a fool, an irritating nag, a heretic, a temptress, an unwitting tool of the devil, or even the devil himself. In other words, they've turned her. Why? Because she says to Job, curse God, right? And so they put all the blame on her that she's trying to undermine. Who is she trying to undermine?
God.
God, right? Because if Job would curse God, then he loses the bet. Okay, so now we have here a very interesting story by Amy Bender. I looked very hard to find the story today. I found a review of the story, right? I found the review of the story, and then I found this story afterwards, after looking for it. It was not easy to find. And if anyone wants the whole story, I'll be happy to send it to you. I found it in the end. Where did I find it? I found it in the end on something. It was done in 1999, and it was called, in some journal called LA Weekly. LA Weekly. So I have it here. If anyone wants it, I'll be happy to share it with you. But what we do have is the summary and the last page. And then after that, I have something else which I'd like to look at. So,
Naomi, LA Weekly is a newspaper.
Okay, and it still exists.
I think so.
Is it? But does it have
a throwaway? It's a throwaway.
Okay, well, for some reason, in 1999, she printed this there.
It says she lived in West Hollywood.
You know her?
No. Okay. Well, maybe I do, but I don't.
Okay, so anyway, Marcia, you read the summary, and then afterwards, Bonnie, you could read the actual. End.
This,
so,
you want me to read this? Jobs by Amy Bender?
Yeah.
You want me to read, right?
Yeah, this is the summary.
Okay.
And Bonnie, you'll read the last.
Okay. This Jobs by Amy Bender tells the story of a man and his troubles with both Jobs and God. He starts out as a writer, and he's content. But that ends when God shows up with a gun and tells him to never write another word again. since he was not about to challenge God, he obliged and put away his writing supplies. He did nothing for a few days, but then he took up art. He obliged and put away, he liked,
He
put away
discovered.
he liked painting, and he wasn't half bad at it either. It made him happy. And God showed up later holding a dagger, telling him that he couldn't make any more images of any sort. So he put away his paintbrushes, etc., and went on to acting. He wasn't the most talented actor, but as with painting, he got attached to acting, and it too made him happy eventually. One day, he got in the car to find God in the back seat with a bayonet. God, of course, was against the acting, but this time the main character tried to bargain with him, asking to keep acting or become a mime. God said no. The main character went along with it. He decided to try cooking and discovered that he was naturally talented at that too. This time, God didn't show up just as soon as the main character began to be happy, but instead he let him dance in architecture. But God shut him down.
Let him enjoy himself.
Wait. Did I miss a line?
Yeah.
He decided to stop. He gave up on cooking, and he enjoyed himself for a while before walking in with a noose. He gave up cooking, then tried piano, dance, and architecture, but God shut him down these times too. He decided to stop being creative and do boring things like accounting, law, chemistry, the stock market. They still interested him, so he had to give those up too. By now, God wouldn't let him talk, so he sat on a bench, and a young woman looked at him, walked around him, wrote in her notebook, and thanked him. God told him to close his eyes, and he couldn't move or speak.
Okay, so this is a summary of the story, and this is
He's obviously a writer for the movies or TV in Hollywood.
Okay. So this is the conclusion. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, should I continue?
Yeah.
God came back irritated. Close your eyes, said God. He was shaking a bottle of pills like a maraca. Like a maraca. The man's wife was unhappy. She was doing the cooking again, and her husband didn't move or speak anymore. She missed their discussions, his paintings, his stories, his pliés. She missed talking to him about her job with the troubled people and how at certain moments there was an understanding held between her and the person sitting there, crying or not crying, mad or not mad, happy or unhappy, bland or lively. And it was like at that moment, she said, they were stepping all over a canvas together. It's like, she said, the room is full of invisible beetles or water or pillows or concrete. She told him all about it, but his eyes were closed and she could only feel from his skin that he was listening. She went over to him and undressed him slowly, and they made love there on the sofa, and he barely moved, but just pressed his warmth to her, his body into hers, and she held him close, and the man gave her all he could without speaking, without barely shifting lips and hips, and she started to cry. Afterwards, she pressed her head to his chest and told him all the things she had thought about, the particular flower he made her feel, the blade, the chocolate tort. They slept on the sofa together. God put the man in a box with no windows and said, stay there. He tied his hands behind his back and knotted a blindfold over his eyes. He stuck tape over his lips. He said, not a peep out of you. Don't you interact with anybody. The man sat with his head full of dreams. He thought of flying fish and the smell of his wife's skin, white powder and clear sweat. He thought of basil breaking open and the drawing of a tomato with red and black paint, and the word tomato, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, and the perfect taste of tomato with basil together, and the rounded curve of a man's back, buttons of spine visible. He wondered where the girl with the journal was right then. He thought of his wife making bridges of air over air. He listened to the sound of wind outside the box. loud and soft as his breath.
Okay, this is not an easy, this is not easy. And if you want the whole, the whole thing to read, what are your thoughts about this? I mean, this is, first of all, this is Job's wife, right? We have a nice picture of Job's wife here, right? And then at the very end, what we have is, we have his thoughts. Oh, the red is terrible. 1 second. Let me just take out the color. What are your thoughts? What does this remind you of, by the way? I mean, there's so many things that this is, it's very painful. Maybe it's even too painful to discuss.
It's even more giving tree. Everything that
Yeah.
God asks for, he says, okay, yeah, okay, here, take this, until he's in a box with sensory deprivation. So it makes him out in Hebrew a complete friar.
But it's God, but God is doing it to him.
No, God is asking him and he's agreeing.
Yeah. She's just a facilitator.
That's interesting. Let me just look at the opening.
I'm telling you, you want to find her, you look at the Writers Guild, and I bet you she's listed.
Right. The writer agreed. All right. But actually, the way it opens up here. 1 second. Let me stop sharing for a minute. I'll just share this the original one with you. I still want to. We only have 8 minutes left, so I don't want to spend too much time on this.
Not on this.
Something else that I really want to share with you, but let me just share this very quickly. So this is how it starts, right? God put a gun right to the writer's head, right? And then it says, you're right, the writer agreed, right? The writer agreed. He had a wife and family. He was sad because he loved words as much as he loved people. Okay. All right. Look, I'll send this to you. It's actually it's fairly long. Okay. So we'll go back to the. If we have time afterwards, we can discuss it. I have something that I think will be very resonant to all of us. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. Okay. Now, we never got to the Apocrypha. All right, we'll have to pass the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha gives her whole life, all right? And he has 2 wives. One is Uzit, they give her name, and the other wife is Dina, and there's a whole bunch of stuff there. We don't really have time for that. I'm sorry about that, because however, the end, this is how it ends. This is chapter 42. So basically we're skipping from chapter 1 and 2, all right? And the so-called happy end of the book of Job. The Lord restored Job's fortunes when he prayed on behalf of his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice what he had before. And all his brothers, all his friends, they all came consoled, right? And he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. The first he named Jemima, the second Keziah, and the third Keren Hapuch. Nowhere in the land were women as beautiful as Job's daughters to be found. Their father gave them estates together with their brothers. Afterwards, Job lived 140 years to see 4 generations of sons and grandsons. So Job died old and contented. Now, we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but instead of spending the time talking about it, let me show you an amazing poem by Shulamit Har-Even, which I translated with ChatGPT. And they only made one very bad mistake, which I corrected. So the word Orvit here, they chant as an Arab woman, and that was a mistake. But otherwise, it's not bad. Who hasn't read anything yet today? Is Joyce still here? Okay, Jackie. Oh, not Jackie. Stevie. I don't know why I'm calling you Jackie. Stevie.
New lives. Yemima and Ketsia and Karen Hapuk built towers in the blue sand. Yemima and Ketsa and Karen Hapuk, bright and quick as sparrows. And their mother, raven-like with a tattoo on her arm, crochets an offering on the bench. One day with her right hand, one day with her left, one day a sample swatch, the lines of her cheeks black, the palm of her hand cut by wool. Toward evening, she sees dimly Ketsa and Yemima and Karen Hapuk, their tongue foreign and haughty, their heads bright as if not of her family. For where are their elder brothers? Where are the youths in black coats she bore when she still feared God and turned away from evil?
Okay, so what's the background here? Who is the mother here?
Not Job.
Remember, it's called Chaim Chadashim, new lives, right? Who is the mother? She has a tattoo on her arm. Where are their elder brothers?
Yeah,
This is
it sounds like
Job's
she went
wife.
through the camp. No, she went through the camps and has a
Oh.
number on her arm from the Holocaust.
Okay, so in other words, she has a tattoo on her arm. She's a survivor. These children who are playing in the sand, right? Their tongue foreign and haughty, their heads bright as not of her family. This is her new family, right? New lives. But what happened to the ones who died in the Holocaust? When she still feared God, right? In other words, when life was good, all right? Now, this is an amazing poem. I mean, it's full of all sorts of things. And there's some commentary here. First of all, Shulamit Har Evan very often talks about Holocaust survivors who build new lives artificially through new marriages and children, right? German reparations. In other words, you come to your new country and you start all over again. But the question is, what happens to your past? Do you forget it? Is it still with you? Do you ever adjust? Right? Right? And there's in another poem, it says here, Noah learns a new language. He's received a Jewish agency bed and 2 sheets. Perhaps the next wave will erase everything, pain and a dry mouth, because childhood does not grow anew, not ever. In other words, the whole idea that what was lost in the flood, all of the damage that was done, the idea of starting over is somewhat artificial, right? In other words, that the new life is, and let's go back what I have here, all right? The new life is inauthentic, right? It's a life of disguises, and it has a haunting veracity, right? In other words, you can't forget the pre-existence or the prior incarnation before the Holocaust. It's still with you, right? And the whole idea of the flood, which we see with Noah, is a metaphor for the Shoah, right? In other words, so the whole idea of these reborn children of Job going back to, right, going back to the chapter 42, right? This is a happy ending, right? The question is it a happy ending? Right? So I leave you with this, all right, to think about. We could also talk about it afterwards if you want, but I just want to show you very, very quickly, and I'll just run through them very quickly. Some of the pictures, some of them are Blake's pictures and some of them are not, right? I have a whole collection of them here. You could obviously, this is what it would look like. This is Yemima, right? The 3 daughters. This is Blake with his new family, his new daughters. Right? I didn't show you a picture of that before, but you have that there. All right. And then there are all sorts of other pictures. All right, we can skip them. Some of them we've seen already. I don't know if there's anything that catches your eye that you want to see better. they're pretty much all, you know, just to give you an idea of people's imagination here. Here, this is the trials of Job, and here you actually have sort of like people coming in the medieval ages, right, to torture. It's really a horrible picture here, and so forth. People coming to comfort him, and you know, people looking. Right, it's called the trials of Job. People looking at his, you know, at his sores. And here's again at the end, with his 3 daughters at the very end. Okay, so we could certainly discuss this. Yes, Stephen. You're muted, Stephen.
The first picture you showed, that it had his arms raised, and the last picture you showed had his arms raised. But also, on the first picture, there were 3 pictures behind him that looked like they meant something.
You're talking about the very last picture. I could show it to you
The
again.
very last picture has his arms up, but the very first picture you showed at the end has his arms raised also, but there are pictures, go all the way up to the top.
It's the colored one.
This one?
Yeah, look at the back pictures
Yeah.
behind him. You
Right.
see there's like God or some entity up there in the top of each
Yeah.
one.
And you can see terrible things happening. This actually looks a little bit too reminiscent of bones, and also, you know, like a charnel. I think that's the correct word, a charnel, with the collection of bodies and bones and whatever. This is Blake's imagination, right? Strangely enough, it says here, "How precious are thy thoughts unto me, O God. How great is the sum of them," which is I think it's Magadlu Machshabotecha, something like that. And then this is what it says on the bottom: they were not found women fair as the daughters of Job, right? So, and then at the bottom, "If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there." In other words, God is both in heaven and hell. Thank you for you know, asking to see those pictures. Anyone else comments on anything? This is not a very uplifting class today, but to say the least. But first of all, that's where I am right now today. In my mind, those of you who read my blog, I've been getting comments from people.
Have you saved the recording?
Have I saved it? I haven't stopped it yet. I think we're still recording. No? Yeah, I'm still recording. Do you want me to stop? Does anyone want to say something that you don't want to be recorded? Okay, so I will stop the recording, but feel free to continue to, all right, let me just stop the recording.